planes. If you catch me at the border, I got visas in my name. If you come around here, I'll make them all day. I get one down in a second if you wait. I fly like paper, get high like planes. If you catch me at the border, I got visas in my name. If you come around here, I'll make them all day. I get one down in a second if you wait. Sometimes I think sitting on trains. Every step I get to, I'm clocking that game. Everyone's a winner, we're making our fame.
That train ride was absolutely awful. You'll thank me later. What?
Jake, why would anyone ever thank you, Jake? You ruined the entire trip for me.
You see this? I've had to deal with this the entire trip. Guys, we actually have to start working now.
Dude, calm down. We just got home.
Yeah, but we said we're going to show the documentary in 2 days.
What's the documentary even going to look like, guys?
Why don't we do it chronologically?
So it'll start with...
Yeah, we could use it as an introduction into polarization. Polarization? What's that? Well, it's actually the point of this documentary. We'll explain as we go. Like how the Uber driver introduced us to the split in the city.
Well, you got the what we call the uptowners versus the downtown people.
New Orleans is split into two camps, uptown and downtown. The two sides have vastly different appearances, average incomes, and voting patterns.
I don't think this divide is just confined to New Orleans. We see this type of thing all over the country. I mean, we even saw it on our trip.
When I called Obama what did I call him? The Antichrist.
Well, it's Trump. He's a nut job, you know?
Tell it like it is.
Trump has 4 bankruptcies in his past and continually, blatantly lies about really dumb things.
A woman, a black, a quadriplegic, black, lesbian, Muslim, they will vote for a socialist.
Why did they act like that?
Well, remember that grad student from Tulane? She explained it pretty well.
Y'all are familiar, I think, with the traditional sort of distribution of U.S. voters.
I think it'd be better as an infographic with music.
It looks very much like a normal bell curve. What we're seeing is that people up here at the top, the middle of that bell curve, they probably haven't moved much. I think moderates are still pretty moderate. But we're seeing the people kind of near the middle of each side of the tail. They're kind of fanning out. They're not tapering off as much as they used to, they're fanning out. So people who were already kind of far right are moving even farther to the right. And I think that is probably a nice visualization of the way these battle lines are being drawn up. Moderates are stuck somewhere in the middle, God knows where, no one's listening to them. But on either end, people are making very clear distinctions about who's with me and who's against me.
Are you following this? Here's Teddy Kotler in the wild to explain polarization in simpler terms.
Oh, hi, didn't see you there. Basically, liberals and conservatives are drifting farther apart. The number of moderate voters is decreasing as their viewpoints are becoming more increasingly extreme. Therefore, the number of voters in both the far left and far right of the ideological spectrum is increasing.
It seemed to me like not only the voters were polarized, but Congress was polarized as well.
Prior to the new millennium, there was a distribution of Democrats that overlapped with the distribution of Republicans. So the most conservative Democrat in the Congress would have been more conservative than the most liberal Republican. Okay? And this was where bipartisan coalitions came from. So that's no longer true. The most liberal Republican in Congress now is more conservative than the most conservative Democrat in Congress. Those two distributions have now moved far enough apart that there is no longer any substantial overlap. That is a new development in American history.
I wonder why there's less overlap in Congress now.
Polarization is the historical norm. Having disagreements that put the two parties on opposite sides is the historical norm. We're just sometimes comparing it to this sort of interlude in American politics where we weren't as polarized, but that's kind of the exception, not the rule.
Did you know that in the Clinton administration, 600 bills were passed, but in last year's Congress, only 98 bills were passed? Talk about an ineffective Congress.
Yeah, just a few weeks ago, I turned on the TV and saw Democrats sitting on the floor of the Senate. They can't get much more ineffective than that.
For those of you who don't know, Democrats from the House of Representatives planned a sit-in to force Republicans to vote on gun legislation to ban people with links to terrorist organizations from buying guns.
Rise up, Americans. This cannot stand. We will occupy this floor.
The veto message of the President on House Joint Resolution 88. The clerk will report the title of the joint resolution.
They are not trying to actually get this done through regular order. No, instead, they're staging protests. They're trying to get on TV. They are sending out fundraising solicitations, like this one.
Here's Nate on the porch to explain.
On June 16th, for nearly 16 hours, Democrats sat on the floor of the Senate and protested. If you ask a Democrat why they protested, they'll tell you it's due to Republican inaction on recent proposed gun control legislation, even though 71% of Americans, according to a recent Gallup poll, support this legislation. Republicans will tell you something different. The Democrats, they say, are merely trying to drive up the media and drive out voters for the next election cycle to swing the complexion of Congress. In this crazy, hyper-polarized world, it seems like this is the opposing party's best strategy of swinging the complexion of Congress in the next election cycle.
See guys, it's stunts like this and the inefficiency of government that has led to such low approval ratings for Congress. I mean, right now, only 16% of Americans feel that Congress is doing a satisfactory job.
Yeah, but we've been seeing the ineffectivity of Congress for a long time. Don't you remember Ted Cruz's filibuster?
Do you like green eggs and ham? I do not like them, Sam I am. I do not like green eggs and ham.
My favorite part about this trip was talking about this year's election. Yeah, for sure. But I've been thinking, is this election really more extreme than other elections? Or is it just the first time I've paid attention to politics?
So polarization is the historical norm. Having disagreements that put the two parties on opposite sides is the historical norm. We're just sometimes comparing it to this sort of interlude in American politics where we weren't as polarized, but that's kind of the exception, not the rule.
Well, people are fed up from the way things are happening, and from anger, that's what spawns the main difference, I believe. So people want to go to the extremes.
I thought this was the one chance in history that I had a chance to vote for somebody that I believed in.
This has to be an unusual election. I mean, look at all the fighting that's been going on.
Most of the violence that I see is either perpetrated by Trump supporters on people that are demonstrating, but lately it's been people that are against Trump.
The Trump protesters specifically, there's a lot of violence at those protests, not specifically from the Trump supporters, but from the protesters.
There's definitely been some violence, but remember what that UT Dallas professor told us?
Charles Sumner was the leading abolitionist. He was a Democrat from Massachusetts, one of the leading spokesmen for the abolitionist movement, and he actually got beaten almost to death on the floor of the Senate by a member of the House of Representatives by the name of Preston Brooks, right from South Carolina. So he beat him with a cane, and there were other people kind of holding other senators and members of the House holding other people back that wanted to stop this beating from happening.
I think this just goes to show the change in the attitude surrounding American politics. And I think what Professor Side said would actually go really well here again.
Thinking about political parties is sort of thinking about social groups. Like, who does that party stand for? Who does it represent? What kinds of people are with that party? What kind of people are not with that party?
We could also include that study where researchers looked at how parents would react if their child married someone of a different political ideology.
No, I don't think we should include that.
No, I think we actually should. It would be cool to have like a voiceover as those graphs were shown on the screen. In the 1960s, a group of researchers asked Americans how they would feel if their son or daughter married someone of a different political ideology, and found that only 4% of Democrats and 5% of Republicans said they would be displeased. But when the same question was asked in 2008, the number jumped to 20% of Democrats and 27% of Republicans. Finally, when the researchers asked one more time in 2010, the number jumped even higher to 33% of Democrats and 49% of Republicans. At similar intervals, Americans were posed a similar question, but regarding marriage between whites and non-whites. In the year 1958, only 4% of Americans approved of interracial marriages. Fast forward to 2010, and 86% of Americans approve. So, Americans are becoming more tolerant when it comes to interracial marriages, but less so when it comes to bipartisan marriages.
It is interesting, though, that with all of the progressive thoughts we are seeing sweeping the nation like same-sex marriage and transgender bathrooms, that Americans are becoming politically closed-minded.
Guys, I think we're getting bogged down by all the negatives of polarization. Why don't we just come up with a solution?
When we were in D.C., though, there was a real sense of excitement and openness around politics. I think that's where we can find our solution.
Well, is it actually even a problem?
Whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, in my mind, depends on whether you think that the voters are equally polarized, right? Because Congress is supposed to reflect the voters, right? So if the voters are polarized, then I think Congress should be polarized. But if the voters aren't polarized and Congress is, then there's something wrong.
I do remember him saying that, but I think the overwhelming majority of experts disagreed.
Do you think that, some people would say polarization is increasing, some people would say it's not, depending on who you ask. Do you think
There's no question that polarization is increasing. If you ask a political scientist, they'll say there's no question about it.
Do you think that's positive?
No, I don't.
Alright, I guess you have a point there.
Thanks for confirming what I already knew, but we still don't know how to fix it.
Well, a lot of people brought up the fact that biased media sources created and even advanced polarization.
That's actually a really interesting point, Teddy. Remember what that artist in New Orleans said? And remember her art?
It's less a political contest and a reality show now. And the way we consume media is like internet and sound bites and reality shows. And so our news has to be the same.
Exactly. I think our modern obsession with reality TV shows has forced news outlets to follow the trend. They are pushing yellow journalism to new extremes just in order to maintain viewerships. It might not be a coincidence that the Republican nominee was once a star of a reality TV show.
The head of CBS or ABC News has already said that this whole thing, that the only winner in all this is the news channel.
This is where I think cable news has really changed America too. And again, it's all you guys have ever known, but there was a time when there were a couple of channels and there were regulations of the airwaves so that you had to have a couple sides of every issue presented to you in the same newscast.
If the campaign or the Republican Party was going to do a hit ad against John Kerry, well then the candidate, in this case George Bush, but it's not just President George Bush, right? It's every candidate. They would be responsible for it, and they'd have to say, yes, that was my ad. I believe in it, and it was true. But now we have, right, the dark money, the super PACs, running all these ads and doing these things that are supposed to be independent, and by and large I think they are, and that's bad because they're going to say things and do things that the parties and the candidates would never do.
I think we have to be careful that we don't make it seem as though polarization has just begun. I mean, it's been around since the beginning of our country. Even the founding fathers were polarized on the issue on how to design our government, I don't think media can really be the sole culprit. I don't remember who it was. Someone spoke to that, though, when we met them.
So in some sense, I think partisan news is sort of too late, right, to be the main driver of what's been going on in politics. That said, it seems to me plausible that partisan news plays a reinforcing function.
Well, we can't regulate the media, so there's not really a fix there.
I wouldn't jump over that so quickly. Maybe we can't control what's played on the media, but we can control how people consume and digest what they see.
Getting back on track to some extent in our educational system, that is recognizing that we need to tell the whole story and quit trying to tell just the one story that we believe. Look, I have my own views about why the Cold War ended, but when I teach it, I teach all of the ways that people think about why the Cold War ended. And that's what we should do. Let the people decide, and let people get interested enough in evidence.
It also seems like the media is using sound bites to turn our candidates into caricatures of themselves, picking up on their personalities and idiosyncrasies rather than their experiences and policies.
I think you're right. I think people pay more attention to a candidate's personality than they do to their policies. They place so much value in just how a person speaks.
Yeah, I mean, even if you just listen to their talks, you can see it. They say a lot, but they really don't say very much.
Guys, do you actually think voters don't prioritize policies when thinking who to vote for?
Yeah, I think voters put most of their stock in a candidate's personality, and I think that's something that candidates know. That's why you see candidates' policies change so much from the primaries to the general election.
Wait, what do you mean? How could voters not care that the candidates will change their ideology so much in just a few short months?
It's actually so ironic. In a contest where we're picking the leader to guide policy for at least the next 4 years, they flip-flop all the time. In the general election, they're so much less extreme than in the primary election.
So you're saying the primary process itself actually plays a part in polarization?
I remember learning this in Gov class, but I think I forget. How does the primary election work again?
The primary process is the process by which each party chooses which candidate will represent them in the national election. The winner of each primary, depending on the state, will take either all or a majority of the delegates in that state. Then the candidates will take all the delegates they've accrued with them to the national convention, and at the convention, whichever candidate has the most delegates will represent that party in the national election.
So how do primaries lead to polarization? I don't really understand.
I can explain. Basically, moderate voters don't show up to vote in the primaries, so the primary elections are dominated by the party activists or the super partisan voters.
So few people vote in the primaries that we end up with more extreme candidates in the general election, right? So when the people actually do turn out and vote in the general election, they're faced with they have a choice between two candidates, right? A Democrat or a Republican. And the Democrat and Republican are probably too liberal and too Republican for the general electorate.
The obvious fix would be a larger presence from moderate voters in primaries, but increasing voter turnout has been an arduous battle in our country for decades, bloodied by defective voting equipment and violent debate over voter ID laws.
The National Citizens for Eisenhower-Nixon have presented this message to all thinking voters, regardless of party affiliation.
We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
Now it's exhilarating to me to think that as president, I could help to change all our people's lives for the better and bring hope back to the American dream.
This could all come down to just a few votes, and yours could make all the difference. So I'm counting on you to grab some friends and neighbors and head to the polls on November 6th.
Some people believe that if the voters won't empower themselves, then maybe more power should be given back to the parties. Maybe this is the case for that.
I think another option would be getting rid of primaries altogether and go back to where the parties themselves pick who the candidates are. Now, would most people like this? I don't think they would. Right? They'd be like, oh my gosh, we don't want to go back to the smoke-filled back rooms. But it would make things better, right? I think this would solve part of the problem with polarization is to give up some of this power, because we don't, we all say we want the power, but then we don't use it, right? And so, like I said, the party activists will use it, and they have used it to their benefit, right? And I think that comes at the expense of the rest of us.
I don't want my voting rights taken away. I think there'd be riots if the party lead suddenly had more power than the average voter.
Well, actually, in the Democratic Party, they already do. They have unbound superdelegates who can vote for whoever they want, regardless of who their constituents voted for. And actually, remember what Professor Stoker said about how the Republicans might do the same?
I would suspect that what the Republicans will do, frankly, is they'll change their process to make it more like the Democrats. And they'll invent something like superdelegates. They won't call them superdelegates, but they will insert into the primary apparatus more stopgaps for the party elite. And they'll do this quietly when people aren't watching. That's how it's done.
I think voters play more of a role in polarization than just through the primary process. I think they also play a role through gerrymandering.
Let's do a quick review. Gerrymandering is the process by which a political party redefines a voting district to create pockets that help them win political appointments in those areas. The primary goal of gerrymandering is to maximize the effect of supporters' votes and minimize the effect of opponents' votes. Gerrymandering works by wasting votes. For example, after the 2010 census, the Republicans used the new data to put all the Democrats in an area into one voting district, allowing the Republicans to win the surrounding districts. This process dilutes the Democrats' influence on the outcome of the election. I understand what gerrymandering is now, but how does that affect polarization?
Well, there's actually no real consensus on that. The political science professors we talked to had a bunch of different viewpoints.
Question of whether or not gerrymandering is responsible for the Republican congressional majorities is a very controversial question among political scientists. But that there is gerrymandering is not controversial. that gerrymandering has resulted in more ideological purity among members of the party is not controversial.
What's wrong, Ted?
You know, it just seems like the farther we delve into the causes of polarization, the more nuanced they become, and the harder they become to placate. Not to mention the corruption of politics. That just muddies things up. I mean, remember what the lieutenant governor said?
Well, you know, most politicians only do what they have to do to get reelected. No more, no less. Look, I put up over $1.5 million of my own money because I wouldn't take money that wanted something in return, but I'm not going to sell my soul to get elected. And it costs so much to get elected. Even some good people, after they get in there, realize they took money from the devil and they can't do the right thing, or they feel obligated not to do the right thing.
I know. Sometimes it seems hopeless.
What do you think?
Me?
Oh yeah, you were there filming the whole time. What do you think?
It seems there is always going to be aggression and heated debate on this issue. And that makes sense considering politics dictate our lives and our well-being. So of course there will be strong, vast, and differing opinions over how they should be dictated. I guess I'm saying polarization is okay, as long as it's born out of a desire for our country to improve, and not a desire to see a certain party in office. It's naive to say that gerrymandering, corruption, biased media, and even the candidates themselves don't push voters towards disagreement for the sake of political victory. But if people want to overlook these influences, I think the tools to do so are right in front of them. If voters become politically educated, show up to vote, and vote based off their values, not what their party wants, and we are still this polarized, then I think we can stop decrying polarization and accept it as a facet of democracy. But that's a study that only the people can perform.
Politics is a substitute for war, right? This is what I always tell my students. It's really important to remember. How did we solve property rights? How did we allocate scarce resources for hundreds of thousands of years before we invented government, right? We fought, right? We killed each other, right? I have this piece of property because I have a bigger group of people and, whatever, we had better weapons and we killed you guys and so you're gone. And so now, right, we've made a lot of progress and we no longer kill each other most of the time, right? Sometimes we still do. But when you see a fight break out in a legislature or people arguing about politics or a campaign, I think that's the thing to remember is that, this is still a substitute for war.